Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Conan Exiles Castle Building Guide. I'm Bman and this time around I'll show you how I decorated my Helm's Deep inspired fortress, which I've built in the previous part. So if you just randomly found this video, you might want to check it out first. Why only inspired and not a faithful recreation? Well, this place was designed as a film set, which simply won't work in game. So I redesigned it as a functional player home and added realistic defensive features which were absent in the movie. Adding all the little details and decorations can drastically change the way the whole castle looks. In this case, the basic design is quite minimalistic, primitive even, and it ruins the sense of scale. Due to lack of features, it becomes next to impossible to tell how tall and wide the walls truly are. So my first task is to restore the sense of scale by adding universally recognizable elements of known size, in this case, humans. This will provide a measuring stick which will instantly make all the dimensions obvious. On the same note, using admin mode to fly around is very useful for building, but it makes you lose perspective and misjudge dimensions. When designing my castles, I often turn it off and just walk, both in first and third person view, to gain a human perspective and sense of scale of whatever it is that I'm building. Usually I only place token forces on the walls, a couple of guards here and there, but in this case I wanted to do something different. To make it look like the castle is prepared for an imminent attack, I fully manned the walls. Placing so many NPCs will take a significant toll on the game's performance, so it was a priority for me to optimize it as much as I could. To minimize the impact of scripts running under the hood, I've opted to use Pippi's Thespian NPCs instead of regular thralls. They all use basic idle stuns, and I made sure to disable head tracking, thus making them completely static. I've defined two basic armor kits in the admin panel for them. A simple chainmail for the Rohan forces, and a bit fancier armor for the elves. The former with a few weapon variations. This way I'm reusing the same objects over and over again, while making them look like an organized unit at the same time. One important thing, I'm using the term optimize somewhat improperly here. Optimization is not something that can be done in-game by the end user. All the necessary tools are unavailable from this layer. What I'm doing is simply using my somewhat basic knowledge to avoid throwing wrench into the works. Now that the troops are in place, there are still some other things to take care of. First of all, lights. I've chosen protected torches since they look nice and are universal, unlike the bracketed torches for example. This is important since I'm going to use them throughout the entire castle. Next are the stones. Movies love to show defenders throwing stones from the walls. Lord of the Rings does so as well. In movies, it's mostly done by leaning over the crenelle, exposing a significant portion of the upper body in the process. This coupled with unrealistically low battlements make it possible to actually see the actor during the scene. So it makes sense, even though it's not really an accurate depiction of siege defense. In reality, machicolations and wooden hoardings were used to throw stuff on the attackers without exposing yourself. I want to very subtly imply the existence of non-combat personnel here. For that reason I've left some space along the walls behind the warriors, and left more stones and wheelbarrow there, hinting that there's someone actually running around supplying the stones to the front lines. I've repeated this on all the walls with some minor changes. I've left only small forces defending the back door and inner gatehouse, as they are not vulnerable to attack until the dipping wall falls and outer bailey is taken. The outer gatehouse on the other hand is fully manned, but I took special care here not to block access to the trapdoors. Also I wanted to emphasize its role as the central point of outer defenses, to make it feel well prepared, so I've placed more supplies here in the forms of crates and barrels. Let's move on. In the movie, the outer bailey seemed to be forgotten and empty. I'm not going to waste this space. One thing the riders of Rohan would definitely need are the stables, and they should occupy a significant portion of the keep. The movie kinda skips over this bit, and magically summon horses inside the citadel when they're needed for the final charge. Look, I'm not saying it was a mistake, quite the opposite. I really enjoyed the movie and I believe it's a great siege scene. But realism is not the reason for that. Pacing is one of the most important things to get right in sequences like that, and as the scene moves to the darkest moment where the failure seems imminent, only to be countered by heroic, hopeless charge of the defenders, asking where did the horses came from is really spoiling the moment, and honestly, if the scene is done right, nobody would notice or care. The same is true for the greatest mistake in this castle's design. Open archway connecting the baileys, which renders the whole inner wall useless. As the battle rages on, the situation becomes more and more hopeless. The pressure is rising, and breaking through the dipping wall and the gates moments later is the exact point where the battle is lost. Hope is gone, and it prepares the viewer for the miraculous last moment victory. Having another gate inside would ruin the pacing, simple as that. That's the compromise. You sometimes have to sacrifice realism to create dynamic, well-paced sequence that tells the story well and keeps the viewer immersed in the fantasy. Anyway, back to building. I've attached the stables to the outer wall. This is the proper way to add all manner of buildings to the bailey. The reason is bombardment. In this arrangement, the buildings are protected from indirect fire weapons by the wall. I've also placed some supplies by the opposite one. I'm trying to reuse everything and limit new objects as much as I can. The reason is twofold. Game needs to load less objects, and certain degree of uniformity is realistic and expected. After all, it's strange to expect every single barrel or sack of grain to be unique. Food, water and arms are all reasonable items to stockpile inside a castle, but there's one more that's often forgotten: firewood. This is actually a crucial resource for surviving siege, especially in places with harsh weather. Finally, I've added some NPCs here so that the place doesn't look abandoned. I've chosen different outfits for them that fit their non-combat roles better. This will also make them look similar to the craftsmen who will occupy remaining part of the outer bailey, and whose outfits I cannot edit. In the crafting corner I've placed awnings on both sides. I admit I did that simply because I enjoy symmetry. Decorating a place like this is quite simple. I start with the required objects, then consider how will they work and add appropriate clutter. In this case I have forges and workbenches, so raw materials, iron, coal, wood, and universal storage, barrels and crates, will work well. I'm reusing a lot of items. This limits the number of unique objects that the game needs to load, and also helps to create a consistent theme across the whole castle. Finally, I've added thralls to the stations and placed a couple of lights around. The combination of animation, sound and light made the scene feel alive and allowed me to see where I should still add some more clutter to complete it. Even though the main keep has 4 floors, only 2 are usable. I've left the grand entrance mostly empty, and the lowest level is wholly taken by the map room and the shrine. This leaves me with 2 rooms, and one of them will have to hold the remaining crafting stations in the kitchen, and also some communal space to interact with other players. The other will become my private quarters. The pillars provide a nice soft barrier, dividing this room into 3 parts. I've left the central part mostly empty, and placed no NPCs here. This area is meant for players. I've placed the kitchen in the far end so that it's out of the way. Players heading for the communal space don't have to go through it. I did not place any light sources here apart from a couple of candles on the tables. I want to create a contrast between this room and player quarters above. Thanks to the black ice tiles color scheme, the whole interior feels cold and harsh. Fire introduces a lot of yellow, orange and red to the mix, making the interiors feel warmer, pleasant and comforting. Also, light might be considered a luxury. The poor dwell in darkness, while the rich live in well-lit environments. This trope is very common in everything from fantasy to cyberpunk. Just think of Midgar from Final Fantasy VII or Bay City from Altered Carbon. Well, actually this trope goes way back in human history, but the premises change a bit. The basic idea is that the world has 3 layers. The underworld below, and I mean literally below, which is devoid of light. Sky above, the domain of gods. and Earth in the middle, between light and darkness. The movie does not show much of the keep's interior, so the player quarters are my own design. Gameplay-wise, I need a bed, preferably next to the elevator connecting this chamber with the map room below. Design-wise, I decided to follow privacy gradient, starting at restricted at the door and reaching completely private by the bed. Just like in the last room, the pillars already divide the area, and I've used a screen to enhance the division by the bed. I started by creating a small armory by the door. This is a cool decorative element, and to me at least, makes sense. This is a home space, where weapons wouldn't be carried, so there's a storage space for them right behind the door. Also, placing it here means that the servants maintaining the gear will only slightly intrude upon the owner's privacy. The middle of the room is occupied by the table. I have chosen a very specific set of clutter items to suggest that this is a reception and conference area rather than just a dining table for the Lord. In terms of privacy, this is a highly restricted area, as only the most important guests and trusted advisors would be invited here, which translates into gameplay, as this is also a space for you, the player, and your friends to socialize. The remaining area will be completely private, and to enhance it I decided to place the screen in between the pillars, which in conjunction with the alcove will create this quiet protected space for the bed, while at the same time allowing for an intermediate, in terms of privacy, space in the corner of the room that's in line of sight of both the bed and the rest of the chamber. I decided to furnish and decorate it in a simple neutral manner that contrasts with the formal arrangements of the conference table in the middle of the chamber. The whole room is well lit with 3 chandeliers, one in each section, and a central fireplace, which gives it a completely different feel than the earlier sections of the keep. Lights can create a dramatic change in how an area is perceived by the viewer, so I always try to go for a certain effect, rather than use light sources as just another piece of clutter. Basically, I always try to get the lights and shadows to fit the scene, even if it means that sometimes my light sources are awkwardly placed. If you're interested in more Conan Exiles content, check out the rest of my channel and consider subscribing as more is coming. Thank you for watching. Cheers!